Hello and welcome. Welcome to what I believe might be a whole 700 of you who've signed up to this webinar this evening. And I am delighted that so many people are as excited as I am to be joining PFLA and Groundswell for this webinar about landscape level collaboration. I guess most of you will already know this, but for those of you that don't, PFLA is the leading organisation in the British Isles championing the regenerative use of ruminant animals, cattle, sheep, goats and so on, and the grazed pastures and habitats they've evolved alongside. The PFLA is a community of over 600 members, farmers, butchers, retailers, academics, vets, all working to these ends collaboratively. And with around 35% of the UK land area being grazed, the PFLA believes pasture-fed principles are key to the future of our country. And the co-sponsors, Groundswell, provide learning services throughout the year, not just at their brilliant Groundswell conference. In its 5th year now, Groundswell provides a forum for farmers and anyone interested in food production or the environment to learn about the theory and the practical applications of conservation agriculture or regenerative systems, including things like no-till, cover crops, reintroducing livestock into the arable rotation and so on, and all with a view to improving soil health. And it's a fabulous conference. My name's Sue Pritchard and I'm the Chief Executive of the Food Farming and Countryside Commission. I'm also a PFLA member and an organic livestock farmer in Monmouthshire in Wales. So I have all sorts of interests in the sorts of things that we're going to be talking about this evening. And the Food Farming and Countryside Commission has developed a whole heap of work around land use and regenerative agriculture, much of which is contained in our report from 2019, and we're continuing to do that work in partnership with people on this call this evening and very many others in the hope that we will be able to influence policy and practice towards more regenerative agricultural food and farming systems at pace and at scale over the next 10 years. So you're joining us here this evening to explore the opportunities and the issues around landowner collaboration at landscape level. And we're talking about landowners. I think we're really meaning land managers, land stewards, people who've got a real stake in land systems. So with schemes popping up all around the country, some of which are incredibly inspiring, and the proposed higher tiers of ELMS payments looking like they'll prioritise such collaborations, we're looking at the subject through the lens of 3 existing schemes with quite distinct approaches. So we hope you're going to be able to take away some concrete ideas and some inspiration to try out in your own locality and help develop your understanding of what's going on, what's possible. So let me introduce the panel to you. We've got Daniel Poole, who's the Cornwall Wildlife Trust's Upstream Thinking Project Manager. I love that title, Upstream Thinking, literally perhaps and figuratively. So it's a river catchment scheme, a river catchment management scheme sponsored by South West Water. The Trust's team of experts work with farmers and land managers in Cornwall to apply natural landscape scale solutions and farm infrastructure changes to improve water quality and resilience to extreme weather. And since my little farm is in the confluence of 2 streams, I'm going to be paying close attention to that particular presentation. Next in the lineup, we have Charlie Burrell, who is the owner of the Knepp Estate in West Sussex. 20 years ago, Charlie and his wife, Izzy Tree, took the decision to turn their 3,500 acres over to a rewilding project, using free roaming herds as drivers of habitat creation. And more recently, Charlie's been turning his attention to how he can work more closely with his neighbours, in particular to encourage biodiversity linkages. And I have to say that Charlie has also been helping us out at FFCC in our own thinking around land use and land use frameworks. And finally this evening, last but very much not least, we have Maria Spink joining us, who is a social entrepreneur with a background in the financial sector and carbon finance. Back in 2012, with her husband, Maria became the owner of a small SSSI in the Chiltern Hills, where she's now grazing a herd of Dexter cattle. And I know how much fun they can be when you need to bring them in to trim their feet or something. Recently, Maria's been working with neighbours and the local wildlife trusts to establish an area where there's mutual agreement that chemicals will not be used. So, without further ado, let's get started. We're going to have lots of time for questions and answers as we go through the session. I'll be trying to keep an eye on the questions as they come through in the chat, but we're going to run through the presentations, first from Daniel, then Charlie, and then Maria, and then we'll take questions and debate after that. Okay, Daniel, are you ready to start?
I am indeed. Shall I share my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. There we go. Well, first of all, thanks so much, Sue. Thank you, PFLA and Groundswell Agriculture for inviting me to talk on the panel and let you all know what we're up to down here in Cornwall with Cornwall Wildlife Trust and in terms of the collaboration that we have going on with South West Water. First of all, I want to just point out the beautiful photo on this slide here. This is one of our catchments, this is Stillian's catchment, and as you can see, it's surrounded by a patchwork of beautiful pastures and farms and habitats, and this is our working operational area, of which we have 4. There we go. So, what are the drivers for our collaboration between Cornwall Wildlife Trust and South West Water? And to explain that, what I'm going to do is I'll talk briefly about what the pressures are on South West Water and then how they've decided to mitigate some of those, and hopefully you'll see how we've meshed together with our kind of modus operandi. So 90% of Cornish water is drawn from surface sources. So the rain would fall on Cornwall, as it quite often does, and pass through the land before being abstracted in the rivers and the reservoirs. 74% of Cornwall is farmland. So the water that hits the ground and passes down to abstraction along the way has been collecting nutrients, farm manure, artificial fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, and all of that is being brought down to the abstraction points, and that's because of industrialized farming practices like farming right up to the edges of watercourses, the compaction of soil. So no longer is the soil able to absorb the water that's falling. It's just passing through and collecting all of that diffuse pollution and taking it straight down to abstraction. We've lost a lot of that organic carbon that's wrapped up into the soil, which normally would, like a sponge, absorb a lot of that moisture and slowly release it throughout the seasons. Not the case anymore in a lot of the catchments. On top of that, in Cornwall, we've got this seasonal flux, but we've also got a population rise forecast for 25% in 30 years. So South West Water's costs are ever growing, and the catchment is kind of no longer deemed fit for purpose for producing that year-round clean raw water. They've also got regulators like Ofwat and the Environmental Agency who are looking for water companies to be more invested in natural capital in their areas of operation. So South West Water decided to look upstream at the resources they had no control over, and it's all largely agricultural, as I was saying, and their big problems are diffuse agricultural pollution and catchments that no longer store and hold that water and release it slowly. So that also leads to flash floods and the likes. So that's their business pressures. Meanwhile, Cornwall Wildlife Trust, and I'm sure everyone's heard about the wildlife trusts, our kind of modus operandi is looking after the habitats in our county. So Cornwall Wildlife Trust habitat since 1962, The key part of that is working on agricultural land, because it's the biggest bang for buck in Cornwall, but also the 50 beautiful pristine reserves that we've got across the county. It peppers along. In fact, cool fact I heard the other day from the CEO from the Wildlife Trust is that we've now got more reserves across the whole UK than there are McDonald's drive-thrus, which is wicked. But anyway, they're all under pressure. So these beautiful bastions of wildlife, and indeed wildlife across the county and country, are all at risk to climate change and to ever-growing pressures if they are not joined up by corridors in which species can move and adapt. And we don't reduce these pressures on that we're putting on the living landscapes. So, I mean, looking at these slides there, you can see we've got wetland habitats have been drained to produce more farmland. Agricultural intensification has led to a depletion of wildlife and biodiversity, and it's loss of ability to hold that water in the catchments, which the wildlife also needs. And the more we were talking with the farming community, the more we understood that they're under these intense pressures, under more pressures to produce higher quality food, higher volumes, quicker, faster. Although they would love the time and the ability to steward that living landscape and the wild spaces on their farm, they just needed the support to be able to do that. And this is, I hope you can see, where we started meshing with South West Water. They wanted to improve the catchment, so it would release cleaner raw water. We wanted a healthy habitat, and the whole catchment is one big habitat, and cleaner water systems. So those are the drivers. What is the project? So Upstream Thinking programme. It's one of the largest and most innovative conservation projects in the UK for catchment management. And the programme uses upstream thinking farm advisors, ecologists. We use armies of cool volunteers, water quality scientists who monitor the water and the work that we do. And we work with the farmers and the landowners in order to reduce diffuse agricultural pollution, to improve catchment resilience to extreme weather, and to improve wildlife in these landscapes on a landscape scale. The catchment management scheme is spearheaded by South West Water, and it's delivered regionally through the conservation organisation. So in Cornwall, we're doing it with West Country Rivers Trust, so it's Cornwall Wildlife Trust, West Country Rivers Trust. Throughout the other catchments in the southwest, there's Devon Wildlife Trust, FWAG, Southwest, Exmoor Myers. And it runs in 5-year increments, which are in line with the Water Industry National Environment Plan, or WINEP. And it's been running, we're now into a kind of 15-year block, so 3 years of 5. So it's a long-going project now. So I wanted to show you this slide here, just to show you the scale of the programme. Obviously, we're right down in the tip there. Well, maybe not obviously, but we are right down in the tip there. But the footprint is massive. That's kind of, it started off as only a couple of catchments, and now going up to 17 catchments and sub-catchments. Our patch, though, is these 4 catchments. So from left to right, you've got Drift, Cobur, Stivians, and College and Argle. And that's a place where, so farming is the landscape, and it's the same for most of the UK. In fact, over in Drift, the far left catchment there, we've got Cornish hedges there. They date back to when the pyramids were built, but they're used for the same purposes, to separate field parcels. So you can see it's ingrained. We've got 7,848 hectares within those 4 catchments that we're working with. So how does it work? So the detail of it, and it is complex. Every day is very different, and every problem is solved in a different way. But generally, it's about working with the land managers, the landowners, the tenants. And first of all, we'll be making contacts. And in the early days, it was a case of making contact to open up that initial dialogue. But now, because we've been running for plus 10 years, we've got relationships with farming communities that have been running for that long. We're now being asked for support throughout our catchments and further afield. But importantly, once we've opened up that dialogue, we're talking about whole farm business approach. So we're understanding the farm's aspirations, the challenges, the concerns, and this allows the advisor to develop a farm plan that's going to last and that runs with the business through the lens of diffuse pollution and increasing habitats and biodiversity. We offer things like land management, farm advice, current sustainable farming practice, soil sampling and soil husbandry advice. Importantly, and something that we'll probably see more come ELMS, blended capital grants for a broad range of positive interventions, from watercourse fencing to manure stores, which all greatly reduce the pollutants entering into the rivers by directly intercepting them. We've got 4 really strong teams of volunteers who go every week, well, obviously not now, we're into our next lockdown, but have been working in every catchment to help the farmer manage those habitats better. It's taking the pressure off the farmer and at the same time being able to work with them. We also do ecological surveys to help farmers understand what natural capital they have, how to improve it, and we help with countryside stewardships. So all of those things, everything is tailored to the farm's holistic business and water quality and wildlife needs. We're working with, that's the important aspect of it, and with longevity. So as the business changes, as the climate is changing, as the different pressures come down, we're able to flex and bend with it. I'd like to talk about a couple of the challenges quickly. Uncertain future for farming. Everyone's feeling that at the moment. International trade deals, new support mechanisms, climate changes, all affecting farming. But we're hoping with the UST programme across all of the catchments in the southwest that we've still got a good 5 years left in us, hopefully more, where we'll be able to be that consistent advisory group throughout ELMS. In fact, Cornwall Wildlife Trust and some of our other project partners are all running tests and trials, ELM tests and trials, alongside the farming community we're working with to make sure their voices are really heard and that we can get the best for them. Them and us. So yes, Cornwall Wildlife Trust used to be seen as the maybe the tree huggers when we first walked up the farmyard. However, every ecologist, sorry, every advisor within our team, everyone in the project team, there's 10 of us, we're all ecologists except for me. But they've all managed landscape scale projects as well. They've all worked with blended funding. And over the last 10 years, we've got the experience and the facts and basis trained advisors who care about the farming sector and want it to be supported. And so now it's gathered a real momentum and a place within the community. Uncertainty of projects, that's always going to be there. It's a generic problem, but we're hoping things like WINEP, like the 25-year environmental plan, drinking water inspectorate, all of these things are pointing towards being part of this kind of blended support that we can give catchments. And our resources are tied to our deliverables. So although we've got some really strong partnership groups, we're working in those catchments, but the whole of the county, the whole of the UK at the moment need this kind of support. Just a slide on results. Really proud. In the 4 catchments that we've been working with, you can see the numbers up there. We've got over 200 farms that we've been working with. We started working in Stithians just recently, so that number is going to surge greatly. We've brought in over £2.5 million worth of support through countryside stewardship, capital grants from South West Water, EA grants, and it's all aimed at improving diffuse pollution. Improving diffuse, I thought I said increasing for a second there. And enhancing those habitats. We've got the fantastic volunteers that are helping maintain all those habitats. There's 3,686 days worth of work just in the last 5 years. And in terms of water quality, the data trends are starting to reduce. We're seeing downward trends in our catchments of metahaldehyde, fungicides, pesticides, they're all dropping. In some catchments, yes, more than others, but we're working on it. and a reduction, as this graph shows, a reduction in the nitrogen measured in both drift, reservoir and cobra catchment, both significantly changing for the positive. I just wanted to finish off, if I may, with a couple of thoughts. So first, catchments have lots of moving parts and often working without knowledge of the others, let alone how they affect the others. So this is something that we've seen improving within our catchments. So the farming communities and in the catchments that we work with, they're starting to understand what it is to live inside this catchment, what support is out there for them. And that's going to be really important for ELMS, we think, moving forward. Secondly, to make more positive impact, or for the best positive impact, we need to work with corporations, with academia, with regulators and governing bodies to empower the agricultural sector to be the best stewards of the land they can be, because the health of the environment and the health of farming are not two separate things. And it's really exciting being part of it. Bottom line is the collaboration aspect of this is working. It is working and it's brilliant. I'm really, really proud to be involved. And that is the end of my presentation. And I hope you're all still awake, because I'm famous for putting my children to sleep with my bedside tones. But if you are interested in more, there's more ways to know about what we're up to on those slides there.
Thank you, Daniel. That was fascinating, and there's a whole pile of questions appearing in the Q&A, but I'm going to move on to Charlie before we start taking questions, and then I'll be able to grab them all at the same time with all the questions in the question bar. So Charlie, are you ready to move on to your presentation?
So yes, hello everyone. Is that all working? Sue?
Yes, it is. It's fantastic.
Great. Okay. Hello, everyone. Charlie Burrell from Sussex. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing here in Sussex, just to frame it in some sort of frame, looking at our rewilding project. And then I'm going to just see if we can tease out where rewilding or more space for nature could fit in a landscape. So I'm going to talk about lowland Britain, and I'm going to try to, with the help of Jerome Helmer, an ecologist and artist, I'm going to paint a picture of what some of the things we've been hearing about from the Lawton Report, some of the things we've been hearing about from the 25-year environmental strategy, and so on. So I'm going to see if I can tease out some of the ideas there, and here we go. This is a picture of Knepp now. This was actually those oak trees sit in a hedgerow in an arable landscape, and now obviously it looks very different. Let me just make sure that's... My story started by meeting this man with the grey hair. He's called Franz Vera, and he wrote his hypothesis in the late 90s. It was translated into English because he's Dutch. It's called Grazing Ecology and Forest History, and he translated that tone of work in 2000. I had met him in the late 90s and got really interested in what he was saying, and then read his book. And I was completely bitten by what he was saying. And the reason I was bitten by what he was saying was that I was searching for things to do with land. We had been farming for about 17 years intensively. I had taken over at age 22, age 23. And was getting to a point where we kept on seeing our overdraft going up and up and up, and we couldn't really see how our grade 3, grade 4 agricultural land could produce commodities on the world market at a rate that was competitive. So I started to search around for other things to do, and as I was interested in nature anyway, Franz Vera's book then really led itself to me thinking about what else we could do with the land. I decided that using his hypothesis, we would put into play a whole load of drivers And these are the Knepp drivers: the Tamworth pig, the Old English Longhorn, fallow deer, red deer, Exmoor ponies, and the roe deer that were already present. And the idea was these animals could drive succession as land was going to be coming from arable to something, some new habitats of the future. We were thinking that what would be the drivers of that system? What would create lots of different habitats for future landscapes? And so that's what we set about to do. The Tamworth pig has given us the only growing population of turtle doves in the UK. It's given us the largest population of purple-emperor butterflies. It is a disturber. It's a disruptor. It opens up the sward. It allows in plants and it allows in new species the whole time. It's known as a keystone species, something that really matters in one's landscape. And of course, it's a proxy for the wild boar. Then we have the heavy hitters. We've got the animals that do this. Imagine you've got vegetation succession, and then you've got the fight back against that succession with browsing and grazing animals. And this animal is a heavy browsing animal that controls the spread of trees and shrubs. We all know what deer do in a landscape, but in this landscape, they are absolutely vital. They are holding back this landscape so it won't turn into close canopy woodland. Then you've got the horse, the single stomach, the teeth on the top. These animals move around the landscape differently than the other animals. They eat differently. They have different mouthpieces that transport and transmit different diseases from plant to plant. All these different species have some traits that they're bringing to the landscape. Then you've got the Old English Longhorn, an old breed that doesn't just eat grass. It will browse. It will move around the landscape in herds and in a wonderful sort of complex herd structures that they have. These animals are known to carry 230 different plant species in their gut, on their fur, in their hooves, and so on. They're browsers as well as graziers. And so they do both jobs. So they're all giving us different traits to drive new habitats. And that's the way we're thinking about it. Knepp, this is a bit of Knepp. This is pre the rewilding project. And this is what we allowed to start to revert to scrubland. And about 6 years, 7 years into this conversion from arable land into scrubland, we put these big animals in. So there was this interaction between vegetation succession and the livestock. The scrubland is looking now like this. You've got some parts which are very heavily browsed, some parts that not so. You've got oak trees that are protected by thorny scrub, which are turning into open grown trees, or groves into little woodlands and so on. And you've got lots of open grassland as well. So it's becoming really quite complex. This has meant that we now think, we haven't quite got to the end of doing all the diagnosis, but we think it's probably the densest population of songbirds breeding in lowland Britain. This is a group of people. Tony, sitting on his chair, is holding a bird in hand and he's ringing. And they've been looking at these particular two species I've highlighted here, blackcaps and lesser whitethroats. In 30 years, Tony, counting up all of those species those two species that he's caught in his lifetime, caught in just a couple of weeks on Knepp. So not only do you get complex breeding bird structures in your landscape, but you also get some of the highest populations of migratory birds on their way to Africa. So this land has really proved to have been fantastic for indicator species like birds. The soil, well, the soil, we did some work with Jim Harris at Cranfield and one of his students, and looking at the soil at Knepp, and that's obviously one of the most important things to look at in terms of regenerative agriculture. We have doubled our carbon, our organic carbon has more than doubled, soil organic matter, microbial biomass, fungal biomarkers. So the soils have recovered, or at least they're on a journey to become, I hope, richer and richer and richer. These are wheeled clay soils that go for 320 meters. So that's hugely encouraging. How does all this sort of fit into lowland Britain? And this is a photograph that I just took off the internet, and I'm not sure where it is. Maybe Shropshire. But what I wanted to have was a dual carriageway and this wonderful canalised river here, and a little bee road, and maybe some quite intensively farmed land with pretty monoculture look. The only sort of good bit of habitat probably is this little tiny bit here, which has then been fragmented with a road. So I wanted to take that and sort of look at it with new eyes, with fresh eyes. So I worked with Jerome Helmer last winter and started to piece together a sort of a storybook on how we could change this landscape. So I'm going to start off by saying that here's some maybe MOD land, maybe some rewilded estate over here like Knepp. I don't know, that just sort of high rich worth, nature worth, high value nature areas in these two areas. Part of the Lawton report was talking about connectivity, was talking about we need to reconnect this landscape. So I've drawn in here, I've actually got lots of bison running through this landscape, and cattle and so on, and some horses and things. But you can see immediately there's a problem here. We can't reconnect landscapes unless we then do something about these road structures. So thinking about that, I then put in some green bridges or green infrastructure. Now, this is a very common thing in Europe. You have lots of these green infrastructure around the world. We have, I think, 2.5 in Britain. The half is because one of them isn't really functioning that well. But I think we need to do and think about how we reconnect with these corridors and these green bridges. But also just hedges. Hedges, this is a 14-meter wide hedge at the bottom. It's part of what's happened at Knepp. These are 3 nightingale territories in this hedgerow. We have got lots of nightingales, but they first came back into the hedgerows that we allowed to then spread out. And because of the grazing and browsing animals, the hedges do stop and the grassland persists. And then you have these big wide hedges with a ditch at the bottom, and you have things like dormice coming back into them. So here's our reconnected landscape with the corridor that the Lawton report talks about. You've also got your hedgerows beginning to become more valuable in that landscape. We know that nature, farming for nature also works. The RSPB commissioned the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology to do a bit of work on a 1,000-hectare site for 5 years, and they gave up, I think it was 8% to nature. And that had no effect of the total calories coming off that 1,000 hectares. In fact, things like bean crops went up by 36%. So we know that that works. So perhaps that could be part of the future mix. Regenerative agriculture. Well, a lot of you will already be thinking of or practicing regenerative agriculture and farming. So I'm not going to really need to spend too much time on this, but just imagine if our landscape was beginning to recover its soils. Those soils are the beginning of life, the building blocks, the whole system. So thinking of regenerative agriculture as a way to produce food and to restore soils and produce all the insects and the biota from the soils that feed the whole system, just what a wonderful picture that would be. You're all familiar with these characters here, so I'm not going to dwell on that. The other thing which I love is wood pasture. Maybe I've just been exploring with people like Jeremy Dagley at Epping Forest and the RSPB up in the Peak District, the idea of no fence, invisible fencing, and maybe mob grazing with invisible fencing could be a future. So that's something that that would be really quite interesting for places like the MOD and places that want to promote the idea that we could bring back wood pasture into our landscape. I think wood pasture is one of the most wonderful, rich habitats that we still hold on to in Europe, in England. Wetlands. Well, wetlands is an easy win. You go from a canalized river system like this to a complex wetland system. Life just pours back in. Jerome here he's such an amazing man. Anyway, he's put in beavers. He's got a beaver here. He's got a lynx stalking a beaver. He's got some bison. He's got a moose, an elk here. Wild boar is, I don't know. He's got a black stork. Anyway, you can see the and people using the site and rowing through it. But wetlands, we know how brilliant that can be for realigning those with nature. The other bit of the puzzle, I'm guessing, is going to have to come from glasshouses, from precision fermentation, precision biology. There's going to be this move towards proteins and carbohydrates produced in different ways. And I'm guessing that's going to happen. Greenhouses are going to be an important part of that future, I'm guessing, as well. So we're going to have to be quite intensive in certain areas of our farming systems. Part of regenerative agriculture is definitely having your animals, your stock still in the system. For me, also having some sort of cultural landscapes where you've still got your hay meadows paid for by society. I think they are such enormously uplifting and brilliant areas to be part of that patchwork future landscape. So we're now getting quite a complex picture here, and I suppose one of the things that we've sort of left out at the moment is woodlands and woodland plantations and how we establish woodlands. We're about to spend over 600 million on establishing new treescapes in our landscape. For me, I think the default needs to be natural regeneration for creating new woodlands. And then once we're managing those woodlands, I think the continuous canopy forestry ideas are really intriguing. And so for me, I think we have to, for disease resilience and a load of other problems, I think that establishing woodlands for the future is going to be a default for natural regen. If we can't do that, then a little bit of planting. If we can't do that, then we'll plant trees. But we need to make sure that we've got some resilience and complexity in our planting systems. Then there's always this idea that you've just got to keep on tweaking it and making sure that you keep on thinking about how it actually is functioning in this landscape. But anyway, that's sort of where I then leave it back to questions and answers, and thanking you all for listening to me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charlie. That was fascinating. And again, a whole load of really interesting questions popping up in the Q&A. But before we get into all of those, I'm going to hand over now to Maria. Are you ready with your presentation, Maria?
I hope so. Let's see if this works. First of all, I would like to say that after Charlie and Daniel, this is more of a concept note. So it is a very new idea that we have put together with neighbouring landowners. And as you can see, this picture might still be more like the green and pleasant land that Charlie just showed us, but we are hoping to make an impact in the right direction. So yes, good evening everyone. I am Maria. I'd like to share this experience that a small group of landowners are making in the southern Chilterns. And just maybe two disclaimers to start. As I said earlier, we are really just beginning, so it is more of a concept note than anything else. And secondly, there was a bit of fake news in the start, because we are not purely about chemicals. We are looking at adding biodiversity and regenerative farming practices onto the land here. Sue already made a brilliant presentation of me. I just wanted to say that I really am an apprentice in this, and being new to the Dexters and the wildflower meadows, it is through that I connected with the PFLA, and I was fortunate enough to learn about pasture-fed ruminants, and I became a member in 2019. So as an organization, I can just say that please, everybody who isn't a member, can you please join? Because just the online forum itself is a fantastic way for invaluable peer advice that at least I have found that. So yes, it all started in 2019 because I went on my first farming conference to Fir Farm, and was amazed by the energy and intensity of the speakers and the participants. I was particularly impressed with Dieter Helm, who spoke about natural capital accounting and the principles of public money for public goods and the polluter pays. And I was so intrigued and intent to get him to speak to local landowners that I asked him to come and talk to us, which he did, and I was thrilled about that. And not only did he bring himself with him, he also brought BBOUT, our local wildlife trust, into the picture, and that happened just a year ago. So during that meeting, we managed to establish that we all wanted our natural capital to grow. So the name of the group is actually Grow Natural Capital, not very inventive. And we were all ready to commit to a vision of making our adjoining lands richer with the support of BBOUT to act as our project coordinators. But from that first meeting in October until we got to signing an agreement in June, it took a lot of time working out what we could actually do, because we were quite a diverse group, or we are a very diverse group, and it was quite difficult to keep together the wishes and requests. So although we all believe in the same things, such as regenerative farming and soil health, then we also have to remember, as you will see here and in some other pictures, that we're actually sitting on some very precious chalk hills. And the chalk hills, of course, require very poor nutrient-rich soil so that the grasses don't overtake them. So there are different aspects of farming that come in here. So you can see these are my Dexters here in the field below us, and they are not mob grazed. They are there to eat as much as they can, and they have not yet been moved into this field here in front of us, which we did later in September. But just to say that the diversity really did cause us both challenges and opportunities. So for example, also the scale of the groups, we're the smallest at 47 hectares, and then we have several landowners with over 1,000 hectares. So there is a multitude of different commercial aspects and environmental schemes that we had to look into. But having said all of that, and now let me see that I have said everything I wanted to say, now how do I move this forward? Whoops, sorry. We did come to an agreement in March where we said these are the landscape scale projects we would like to see together. So we decided to go for the first one, very importantly, deer control, because all the undergrowth is being eaten, so we couldn't even imagine woodland improvement or hedgerow rejuvenation before we had sorted out the deer control. And then we also all agreed on chalk and wet grassland restorations. And those were the four that we then signed a contract with BBOUT in June of this year. So here you can see, I took this picture this morning. There's a lane there about 200 yards down, and you can see how clearly you can see through that woodland. So this is going to be our first project, and we have already agreed and set up a group of locals who will run this together with the with the Forestry Commission's Deer Advice Group. And we have managed to bring in also adjoining landowners so that we have a full coverage of the area and can go ahead with this and synchronized control management this winter. This is a project that can go ahead without any deer management. This is a typical, well actually not typical, a fantastic, well-managed wildflower meadow from one of our members. As you can see, it's rich in scabiouses, ladies' bed straw, and kidney vetch. And the kidney vetch, again, is very important for the small blue that feeds purely on kidney vetch. So, you know, there are streams of different kinds of conservation and management going on in these various fields. I would just like to say on the grassland restoration that in terms of the national context, under the DEFRA's Magic System map, there is about 1,300 hectares of chalkland within the Chilterns. And we think we have identified more or less the same amount of land that we could put back to chalkland as well. So this would be, you know, an amazing thing if we could actually get back this amount of high quality chalk grassland to its original use. So that was the second project we have discussed, and yes, back to my dexters. I think we will skip those. And we are then coming to the fact that we have, BBOUT have suggested the replanting and management and regeneration of hedgerows. We have about 60 kilometers now between us, and we have identified another 22 kilometers that we are happy to go ahead with once we have the deer under control to do that. They will all be multi-species, of course, to give space for as many birds and butterflies and insects as we can come up with. The fourth project is woodland and scrub improvements and trying to link together existing fragmented woodlands. All in all, again, we have about 1,200 hectares of land between us now, some of it priority lowland beech and yew. And on this point, we believe we can get existing subsidies for buying and planting stock. And hazel coppicing will also work very well within these woodlands. We also have quite a lot of ash dieback for the moment, so there's going to be a lot of replanting that needs doing anyway, so this fits very well within that context. So these were the 4 projects that we decided on and signed a contract with in June. Then from June to October, BBOUT spent time going out surveying our lands and just came back last week actually with the report that we have now discussed preliminarily with them on what the next steps are. So I think we're sort of in the midst of all of this, so I'm not sure how much information or advice I can give to you on this. I think we will know more in 2 or 3 weeks, but what I can say is that what we have got for the moment is 3,500 hectares of adjoining land where we all believe in these 4 project landscape type. So we will need to start with the deer landscape first, the deer control first within our landscapes. That's going to be critical for us to be able to start the woodland and the hedgerow planting. The sort of, I guess, the lessons and the results learned is that as to costs and subsidies and structure of this, it's still very loose. We have gone out on a limb to say that we know these are all long-term projects and will take a long time to come to maturity. So we are sort of hoping that ELMS and other environmental schemes will help us on the we hope that, you know, again, we have nothing of the scientific rigor that Charlie just showed us, but again, we trust in BBAT that they will bring the rigor and the scientific surveys, the monitoring and the planning to get this done so that we can prove what we are doing. And I think one of the main points here is that the critical lesson we have learned is that we really need buy-in from everybody in the chain, from the shepherds, the tenant farmers, the landowners. Otherwise, the projects will not just work in the field. So, yeah, I guess for me, my main comfort is that we have been able to come up with this common understanding that we all want to do it. We all want to support nature's recovery, and we all want to improve the soil health we have and the biodiversity. So that has given at least me, and I hope all of us, hope and comfort that we can really go ahead with it. And on that point, I would like to say to all of you that, you know, although I despaired about the environment before we started with this, I would really recommend that you go out and talk to your land neighbours and see what they want to do, because it's amazing what you can create when you have a larger group and a larger area that you can tie together with hedgerows or woodland or chalk hills. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. That was lovely and really beautiful slides too. Well, there is a wild old debate going on in the chat over there. Maria, that's great, lovely. And I think you're probably all having a good old discussion, an animated discussion or a heated debate, as Mrs. Merton would have said, with each other over there. But I'm going to pick out a few of the themes that have been coming through both in the Q&A and that I've been spotting in the chat as well. I'm going to start with what, actually, looking at the nature of the conversation, feels like the easiest one, which is about whether this is a technical transition or whether this is a culture change, a paradigm shift. Questions asked by Rachel Butler and Tony Hockley in the Q&A earlier. And if it is a culture shift, you know, at a paradigmatic scale, how easy are you finding it to engage your neighbours, your folk around you, or the farmers that you want to target and work with? I'm going to start with you, Daniel, if that's okay.
Sure. So I suppose with the cultural shift, it comes in a couple of aspects. The one thing that we were really keen to do with the Upstream Thinking project was that we wanted to be able to set up the farmers within the catchments to win without us there. We wanted them to have that consistent narrative that farming practice can work with natural systems and the wildlife. And again, because of the constraints of a project, there'll be an end at some stage. If we don't install that independence and that, and I call it a cultural shift, but a lot of the farming community are really there already for us. They're already, you know, keen and behind us. They understand the share and spare argument. They're all like, yeah, I'm 100% behind you. But the bottom line is that the market talks, and that's what they have to, that's the kind of tune quite often they're having to march to. And if it's easier to put in, or not easier, if it's better as a business decision to rely on inputs, etc., then that's the way that they'll go for. So when we're going for these cultural shifts, we're trying to talk about the land shared, where, you know, you can have benefits for bringing nature onto the farm. As one of our farm advisors, Stuart, I was going to show a film tonight. He was working on the farm in Coburn, and we had a cool video with it. Go and have a look on the website, it's really nice. But basically the farmer he was working with, they did some simple soil samples, which the farmers quite often that we work with will do every now and then to get a general idea, and then they'll stick to that theme, or the way that they manage the land will be handed down by a father figure. But Stuart saw that the soils were all out of kilter, you're putting too much in. You don't need to be putting in all this nitrogen. You need a little bit of lime perhaps, and then you could be making big cuts on your overheads. You'll be able to produce the same amount, same quality and quantity and quality. So it's little things like that that we're looking for that shift. We want to empower them. We want to make sure that they know the tools are there to farm with nature when the projects are gone and when we can't be there to go and knock on doors and say, so, you know, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to achieve better land management for nature, for diffuse pollution, etc. So those are the changes that we're going for. And is it like a big cultural shift? I think it's, you know, we're pushing against open doors largely. We just have to make sure that the business cases all suit as well.
Brilliant, thanks Daniel. And Charlie, I remember you telling me once that when you started out on your journey at Knepp, your neighbours were not at all happy as they were watching some of the impacts of your transition starting to creep over into their land. But now that's changed. What do you think enabled that change to happen and to be able to work differently with your own neighbours?
So it's probably not changed. I think if I was to say, come and have a look at my nature reserve, that would be acceptable and fine. If I was to say, come and have a look at my farm, they would say, well, you're not farming. So I think when we talk about paradigm shifts, I think for the painting that I've just painted for our landscape, it is a paradigm shift. One of our local estates down here, there's a tenant farmer who's got this lovely little business, and it's he brings in a whole lot of students and kids on cream teas, and it sort of darling buds of May, and it's 160 acres. He's got turtle doves, he's got nightingales, he's got a little stream with brown trout breeding in it, and he goes and shows these kids around. And he's saying that the young farmers groups that he shows around now are beginning not to be able to tell him what the trees are in the landscape. Now, there is a study done by the National Trust looking at the level of knowledge between urban and rural populations, and there is very little difference in the knowledge about what is around you. Now, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you're going to have to pick up the knowledge of a whole generation and their next generation to a level where they can then start to really participate and understand the trouble we're in. Well, maybe they'll understand that anyway. I don't know. But you know, we you know, the big ideas, the Lawton report, the bigger, better, more joined up. You know, that is a real problem if you're not even interested enough to find out what the trees are on your landscape. So, so I don't know if that helps at all, Sue, but.
I've got a call in, irritatingly coming in the background, hoping somebody else will pick that up. Maria, do you want to say something about how you forged your collaborations with your neighbours? What was it that enticed them to join with you?
I don't think there was well, first of all, I think that there is a huge cultural shift going on, and I don't think it's just the Pasture for Life bubble we're living in, or the people who believe in Gabe Brown's regenerative farming, or you know, the Savory Institute. But I do think there is a general unease going on, and that includes both urban and rural. And from my urban friends, I have been, and that's where I was very worried that everyone was going vegan or going clean meat. And that was what really got me off my feet, because I just found that so disturbing, that they could not see the value of cattle in a restorative, you know, in a regenerative farming way. So the fact that that movement got so strong, I found very worrying. So the cultural shift back from that, I think we have a very long way to go to prove that you can produce healthy, nutritious food within a functioning farming society. And I think all of our neighbours were aware of that and wanted to do that. It's just that nobody had we hadn't put our heads together to do that before. So I don't think there was any need to allure them with this. It was already, you know, we were all ready to go. It was just the practicalities of getting everybody together that was more of a problem.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the economics of this for the farmers and land managers involved. There's lots of questions coming through, both in the Q&A and the chat about this, and lots of folks saying, how did you make money, or how do the farmers that you collaborate with make money out of this model of business? And you know, how is it? Are you making money from farming, or are you, if you're making money at all, or are you making money from something else completely? Because I guess for everybody, for all of us in this world, we've got a right and a need to make a good enough living from the fruits of our labours. And I guess, you know, it is a big ask for lots of farmers, land managers, to imagine how they can make a good enough living from a whole new way of doing things. Charlie, how did you tackle that big question?
First of all, I'm really fascinated because I've just been doing some figures on setting up a regenerative agricultural business on 300 acres outside of our rewilding project on Knepp land. And the enterprise we're thinking of doing is beef and sort of single suckling herd and egg production. And it's been absolutely mind-blowing because you know, it's 20 years since I was really thinking in terms of production systems and so on, and the figures are appalling. And the only thing that makes it work is if you can attract countryside stewardship money, Pillar 2 money, as well as your single farm payment. So that's sort of appalling, isn't it? I mean, you can't even think about setting up a business that just relies on the value of the food that you produce. It's sort of, I don't know, it just feels absolutely wrong. What we did is we went from thinking that we couldn't compete on the commodity markets of the world. We were 2 tons a hectare light of a system that would actually give us a return without subsidies. And so I thought that, you know, there was no future in me trying to make my land fit into a feed wheat system. So that was the first thing. We couldn't carry on as we were. If we were being told back in the decoupling years of 2003, 2004, that subsidies were going to disappear in 10 years' time, and so looking at the figures, we just couldn't think how the hell we could manage that. So we started to change. So the changes we made were, we released a whole load, and where we are is in the southeast of England, and I know it's very different from a lot of places, but where we are, there's a demand for buildings. So every time we gave up a building from agriculture, we could convert it and do something else with it. So we get a rent for it. And the employment from having your dairyman and your farm manager and your key workers working on site, we didn't need that anymore. So we could actually release and rent out those cottages. So that was another bit of income. We were getting environmental stewardship for what we were doing, and we still are. We were getting our basic payment, which we still are, and which is now, as we all know, disappearing. We also started up about 4 or 5 years ago a tourism business. Now, that's been a complete eye-opener to me. Farmers are used to budgeting for 1.5% returns on working capital. When you then look at suddenly a tourism business which is returning 20 to 30% on working capital, you're suddenly completely bowled over. So I'll just give you some figures. Environmental stewardship for Knepp is about 220,000. Basic payments is about 200,000 a year. We have about 620,000 a year now from letting out post-industrial farm buildings. We have about 120,000 a year from houses we're now renting out. We've gone from we've actually gone up in terms of employment. So we have now employ more people than we did before, but they're not living on site, and they're not in agriculture. They're more to do with ecology. That's to do with the tourism, camping and glamping, and that is turning over about 650,000 a year. We also are producing about 75 tons of live weight coming off the site, and that turns into about 35 tons of meat. And we sell that through a website to customers that want a box delivered to their door. We are going to process that further, and we're going to build a maturation unit, a cutting room and butchery, and with Fur Farm, hopefully we'll be using their mobile slaughterhouse and setting up maybe a hub for other PFLA members to use. So we hope to build that meat business into something much bigger. But at the moment, that's producing about £120,000 worth of meat a year. So that's the sort of principles, and and from when we didn't have stock to where because I saw one of the questions was, how did you survive until you started producing stock? Well, we survived by handouts from government, so it was grant aided. So just that whole process of allowing the vegetation to start to come into your fields, you have to do that with just sitting on your hands and waiting and watching. I can answer lots more questions on finances, and I've got if people are wanting, but that's sort of the basic principles.
Thanks, Charlie. And Daniel, I'm wondering, the farmers that you're working with in Cornwall, I'm guessing don't have the same scale of enterprise as Charlie does, and indeed some of them may well be tenant farmers, are they? Or are they all landowners?
Unmute. Yeah, so we have a mix. There's tenants, there's landowners, there's a big horticultural sector down here as well, because we get all of the rain and a fair bit of the sunshine too. Mm-hmm. So there's a real mix there, and in fact that's something that we're doing with some ELMS trials. We're trying to bring the horticultural sector in, because traditionally they've not really gone for some of the schemes, the stewardship schemes, because none of them really talk to their businesses or speak to their businesses. So that's something that we're really interested to bring in. But yeah.
But tell me a bit about the economics. What are the economic conversations that you have with your farmers, as well as the ecological ones? How do you persuade them that they can still make a good enough living from the sorts of practices that you're wanting them to deploy?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. Well, first of all, if it's okay, I'll answer a question that came up in the chat group on the economics about how we fund the project, if that's all right. It's just so South West Water fund our delivery team to go out and do the job. There's no money out there anymore for straight ecology projects, not that much, and conservation. So it's through delivering projects like that where Cornwall Wildlife Trust were able to go out and have those positive effects on the ground for wildlife, that and the membership. Whereas the money that they're leveraging for farmers, as long as it's through the guise of diffuse pollution, making the landscapes more ready for those extreme weather events and improving the natural capital, we can help bring stewardships. We can help get capital grants from South West Water as long as they speak to those aims. Natural England, and there are other blended schemes out there that we keep on bringing in. But one key point, and something that I suppose is important to say, is that farmers are always really busy, and when it comes to having a cultural shift, it's not an overnight thing. And same with their economies are a lot more fragile. What with all the changes that are coming up, all the pressures that are on them and on the sector. So all those little changes that we're going for are smaller and incremental, and that's the same for their gambles when it comes to installing new methods of farming. So we work really holistically. Like I said before, we're looking and listening to the farm business, and we're looking at natural, hopefully natural or infrastructure interventions that can go in place. It's not necessarily helping every time. It's not helping their bottom line, but what it is doing is helping them being better stewards of the land, and in some instances less inputs, which is, you know, it's a good thing for nature, but it's also a good thing for bottom line. Yeah, it's so complex and it's so difficult to make all these changes, and it won't happen overnight. Yeah, I think what I'm getting from you, Daniel, is that you're recognizing that any macro solution has to work on the ground for people who need to make it work. And whilst, you know, we're all a bit guilty of talking about farmers as if they're some, you know, homogeneous bunch, that they're all the same, we all know, I mean, and represented on this very, you know, call, we all know that farmers, land managers are extraordinarily different, with all sorts of different enterprises, all sorts of different business models, all sorts of different contributions. And actually that diversity is a strength, but it means that we have to be much more forensic, much more thoughtful about how we work with all those different kinds of farmers, from those who hear this, listen to this, you know, folk in the chat are saying, look, we get this, we are already conservation farmers, but how are we going to talk to those farmers for whom this feels very, very far away? And we need different strategies, I think. 100% agree, and I think that it's going to be something that we're probably going to see more of, is that whole blended support. So as Charlie was talking about, you know, he's looking at his farming business, about other inputs and other ways of floating his business through diversification. The same is going to be possibly through funding. So it's going to be through blended funding, through different pots. So it's going to be important to understand where you are, not just as a single business, but where you sit. Are you in a catchment? What schemes are running in the catchment? Which operators are in the local area that put out regular schemes, regular pots? What support is out there? And something that I think that we'll start seeing springing up a lot more is advisory groups that want to go and help and fill this void of what's going to happen. You know, everyone's in the same boat, which is one of the reasons we're trying to get involved with ELMS at the moment. We want to be there at the front line to make sure we understand and we process all of these changes that are coming, because, you know, all of our friends in the agricultural sector are quite frankly concerned. Some try and bury their head in the sand, just going through the processes, keep feeding the market. Others are unsure whether that will be enough. And so we're concerned for them, but we're also excited, because I think that there is a potential for ELMS to be a really good thing if it's done right. And it's these next few years, especially as these pilots kick off, that we're going to find out whether there's a economical value to it that we're hoping there will be.
And let's talk about other sources of finance as well. I suspect that Maria will have a broad perspective on this. You know, we have in the past, I think, thought about the kinds of income that can be generated from land through fairly narrow lenses, either, you know, intensive food production, or through, you know, people are talking about golf courses and pony paddocks and you know, infrastructure developments. But suddenly we're entering into a phase where there is a much broader recognition of the very many other ecosystem services that land can and will have to offer, like carbon sequestration, like access to nature for people's health and well-being. And we're now starting to understand what it means to put a value on that, and how that broadens out the economics of farming, land management, and farming for nature as well as for food production. I am going to come back to food production before we finish, but before I do, Maria, what are your thoughts on where the range of economic benefits in this kind of land management might come from?
Who are you asking, Sue?
I was asking Maria, because with her financial background.
May I just first take a step back and just go back to what we were just discussing? And I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting, but as far as I understand from the PFLA members I know and the regenerative farmers I know, the majority of them are saying that they're much better off now financially, farming with nature in mind that they were before when they were doing conventional farming. So although I myself, and yes, I am an apprentice, and I am of course I'm not surviving on 47 hectares of land, but I can see that would work. But coming back to your question, Sue, yeah, I absolutely agree that, soil carbon is one of my favorite subjects for the moment, because we already have a good system for woodland carbon. And I think soil carbon is going to be incredibly important, that we can set a standard for how we will calculate that. It's already now being marketed in the US in the voluntary market, so there are standards for it. That's going to be a huge step for us with all our permanent grasslands once we can get to doing that. And I do hope that will be part of ELMS. I do put a lot of trust in ELMS. Maybe I'm being very naive, but from what the environmental bill looks like now and what we can hear about it, I think there is hope that farmers will be correctly financed for what they're doing. I'm sorry,
that's fine. Let's just carry on the private finance as well. I mean, one of the things that I'm very anxious about at the moment, let me be completely straight, is that if farmers can't find a way of making a living from their land, then they're going to sell up, and there is a huge risk at the moment, I think, that private equity will pour in. Some people talk to me about a tsunami of private capital waiting to come in, but they are not likely to come in with the same kind of passion for the place as maybe those folk who live and work in those communities. And I really fear at the moment a kind of return to the 1970s, where private equity storms in, plants huge landscapes of Sitka spruces, because it's tree planting, isn't it, and create huge monocultures that we know are going to be really, really unproductive. Charlie, how do you think we might mitigate that risk, that people feel that people see half the story but not the whole thing? I'll ask Charlie and then come back to you, Maria, shall I? Yeah.
So I think it is one of the real scary things that so we with the people that I know within DEFRA, it's quite interesting. You go back to, why are we planting trees? Okay, is it carbon? So if that's the reason, so what sort of trees are you going to plant? Where they're going to be planted? Why are you planting them in the first place? I think a lot of us don't really realize that actually we're not a timber producing country anyway. We have to import timber from colder climes, where we, if we're wanting certain standards, British standard, whatever it is, for we have to get that timber from elsewhere. We're too warm, too wet. Our spruce and our trees grow too quickly. So if we're going to be planting trees for carbon sequestration, then we're going to have to not turn them into wood chip and burn them and so on, we've been told now. So all these things about, why are we planting trees? Well, is it to restore nature? Yes, that's where I'm coming from. You're establishing treescapes and not woodland treescapes that are going to give us high value nature, but also it's going to store carbon long term. These are stable long term systems, with or without animals in the mix. So for me, wood pasture is very much part of that, and I think that one of the problems we have is we've been doing all these trawling through papers just to see if we can find any papers about natural regeneration in terms of carbon sequestration with wood pasture in mind, and we can't find anything. We get lots of this data from the tropics, but nothing in temperate zone Europe. And so both Woodland Trust and Natural England have been trawling through all the scientific work, and we're finding very little there that actually gives us any comfort that actually that is true. So that's a problem. So it's a bit of missing information. But for me, the woodland that that people are wanting to accept back into landscapes, the mad ideas that come up from the city and those guys are just They have no idea what they're doing and no idea what they're talking about. And so for the people that do know what they're talking about and that actually live in the countryside and are landowners and or look over land, then that really can be a huge problem and a real worry. But we hope that government actually is listening.
Yeah. Maria, you wanted to come into on that question.
Yes, sorry, about the woodland and about reforestation and carbon. Yes, so I mean, carbon isn't, the trees grow much slower in this part of the world than across the equator. So obviously the most successful carbon projects are in the equatorial parts where you get very quick tree growth. And as I understand it, the UK regulations don't allow for monocultures of trees here. And thirdly, I don't think that private equity will have the time frame to invest in farming in the way that we're talking about it. And if hopefully the polluter pays rules come in and we have penalties for polluters, then I just don't think that private equity has the appetite to deal with that.
So that's something that we can hope for. I mean, it's not that we don't want to see, good quality private finance coming in. Of course we do, but not all finance is the same, as we know, and it's really important, I think, as we say in the Food Farming Countryside Commission, to have a land use framework for the UK, so we can be much clearer about what works and where, and how we mediate and balance the different requirements that we have for our land. Also, I'm going to go on, Danielle, and then I'm going to come to food.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, just a quick one on the carbon sequestration. I'm always struggling with that word, but with carbon, which is going to be potentially, well, it's already a big word being bounced around. But something that people keep forgetting is that all the farmers here have one of the best ways of managing carbon, that well-managed soils actually sequester more carbon than trees. So, that's something that we definitely need to be remembering when it comes to a time when you can start putting carbon down as your business.
Absolutely. Good. Now then, let's pick up a real hot chestnut that's been running through the chat from the start, and that's the relationship between these kinds of landscape collaborations and the other thing that we need from our land, which is food production, and the balance, I suppose, we need to explore between devoting land for nature, for carbon sequestration, for climate mitigation, for people's access to nature, but also the need to produce, to sustainably produce high quality, affordable food for people in the UK. How do you balance out those dilemmas? Let's start with you, Charlie, on this one. How do you make sense of that dilemma in your own thinking, your own practice?
It's so complex, isn't it? And it's mixed up with the whole thing of nutrient transference from other countries, the exporting of damage to other countries. It's the water transference from other countries. These are all coming in with food products coming into the UK. What do we produce? We produce a whole lot of feed wheat. We then send that up. So all of these things are really complex, aren't they, in producing food? From me, where I'm coming from is the IPCC's report talking about, in our climatic zone, every degree that we rise, we are moving temperatures 150 kilometers north or 150 meters up. And that's a rate of about 7 kilometers movement in temperatures a year. So in 2050, at the current 3.2 degrees that we are expecting to get to by 2050, we're looking that the temperatures down in Sussex will be the sorts of temperatures that Europe gets in Nice. Or put another way, the temperatures in Northumberland will be the temperatures that I'm enjoying down here at the moment. So that, for me, is the real driver of this, is that if we do not make space for nature, if we do not reconnect our landscape. And I believe in a sharing of our landscape with nature. Even if you're on grade 1, grade 2, I think you should be sharing in some way corridors and hotspots and so on for nature. Why should people living in those areas be without nature? I don't understand the other way of thinking. But if we do not reconnect our landscape throughout our little island, then we will lose so many species. I mean, the IPCC's report is talking about, if we're talking about 3.2 degree rise by 2050, we're talking about 50% of our species being lost without reconnecting our landscapes. Now, the losses of species are still going to be high with that temperature change because it's faster than it's ever happened before. But you're going to save a number of those species if you do reconnect and start to rebuild ecosystems in our landscape. So for me, it's driven by the knowledge that some of these models are talking about real major changes in the way that we are going to be experiencing our lives in this landscape. And how do we mitigate against that? And so for me, it's that whole idea that if you start to build resilience into your landscapes and have these corridors, have these hotspots for nature, at least some of these species will survive into the future. You're on mute.
Daniel, how do you pick up the conversation that you must have with your farmers about the relationship between the work that you want to do with them and food production?
Yeah, so again, we're there to work with the farmers, to work with the farming business. But our totally with Charlie, like that's our main driver is Cornwall Wildlife Trust. What we're really after is protecting the environment, our habitats, our species. One of our big missions is to help join up all of those kind of super highways of nature from all the bastions of reserves that we have, from the rewilded spots, which all have an incredible place to play. But we can't at the same time say that everything needs to be kind of rewilded. We still need to be able to eat. We still need these fields to work. Talking with the farmers largely in our catchments, they're on board with all of that. They all understand the plights that we're under. It's, you know, it's in the media, it's everywhere. We've got the IPPC, a lot of them have even read it. Yeah, so it's not, again, we're pushing against an open door. But at the moment, at the interim, until we're pushed to make big changes, which will affect their incomes and their business models, it's still going to be driven by the market. It needs a onslaught of education, new farmers coming up, being educated in a slightly different way, joining with people like everyone here in the forum. I'm reading through the notes here, everyone's totally clued up, but that's not everywhere in the UK. We don't have that kind of understanding. Education needs to be better. Policies need to be developed that actually empower the agricultural sector to make the right decisions. We need to vote with our own feet. We can't wait for these things to always happen. So a farmer will continue to, you know, work their business, supplying the demand. Well, we've got big supermarkets undercutting from overseas. We need to be, again, voting with our feet. Coronavirus has shown us one thing, that, you know, people are really enjoying and embracing the whole cooking from home, going to the local farm shop. It's actually enjoyable. It gives you, you know, it fires off those endorphins. But it's also having a massive effect to farming bottom line, sorry, but to the environment. We just need to capture that. And when we talk with our farmers, they're all saying the same. They're all saying that, you know, we need to keep on feeding the market until all the policies change and the drivers change. It's just so complex at the moment.
I just had my attention drawn to the time, and with my terrible eyesight, my rubbish glasses, and how fascinated I am by what's going on, I've completely lost track of time, and we're already over. So I'm going to really quickly wrap up, but just to ask for a final couple of words or phrases from each of the panelists before we close. But by way of wrapping up for me, this is such an important conversation, such a critical conversation, and the range and variety of conversation in the chat and in the questions just demonstrates how deeply interconnected and interrelated these questions actually are. We might be talking about what looks to some like a fairly prosaic thing, getting farmers to do something differently around a water course, but actually we are talking about changing a whole food system, and not just in the UK but right around the world. And thankfully there are very, very many people who are turning their attention to this huge challenge, not just in the UK but elsewhere. And in the Food Farming Countryside Commission, we're playing our own small part by commissioning the research and working with experts and farmers, land managers on the ground to understand what are the range of strategies and practices we can deploy to take us to a better place that we need to be in terms of farming for climate, for nature, and for health and well-being. So let's do this again before too long. Let's come back to this topic. And by way of finishing up, I'm just going to ask our fabulous panelists for a few final remarks. If there was one thing that you could be saying to policymakers and politicians right now about the kinds of support you need for the direction of travel that you're in, what would that be?
Want me first?
Let's start with you, Charlie. Yes, we'll go Charlie, Daniel, and Maria.
I'm a very positive person. I hope and believe that we will get there. The mood music coming out of meetings at Downing Street, though, is very worrying to me. When DEFRA walk into the room and say, really, you're being far too ambitious, government, and really what we ought to do is concentrate on clearing up plastics from beaches. I think we have a real struggle on our hands to get DEFRA and DEFRA moving in a way that I'm hoping that they will move. But I think that we really do need to keep the pressure on both politicians and all the civil servants that we do know, because I think that we do need to give them support in being brave and thinking outside the box.
Thanks, Charlie. Daniel, what about you?
I would agree with all of that. I would also say that soil health is going to be, it's like almost that golden thread that runs through everything. Where there's that statement that 25% of all biodiversity on the planet is within those few inches of soil under your feet. It's the bit that holds all the water in the catchments and slowly releases it. We're seeing flash floods, we're seeing droughts. It's going to be the key thing to watch. So get your organic carbons in there. We need support, policy support, to make sure that that's actually high on the agenda. It's the thing that links us all together, links all the catchments together. So I would say, yeah, it's time to get dirty.
Maria, last couple of words from you. You've been getting dirty down in the Chilterns.
Absolutely. So no, I agree with everything that was said. Obviously, soil health and regenerative farming is the way forward. That can easily, there's no problem running that together with livestock. It doesn't have to be industrial farming anymore. And yeah, education of politicians and the public in general. That's all.
So there's been, I've just been reminded that Groundswell are offering to put on another seminar like this one fairly soon. But as Jimmy says, I think there's so much to talk about. We may need many more bites of the conversational cherry than we've had time for tonight. So I'm going to take a little action away to also put on another conversation like this, because it actually really does inform the work that we can do, that all of us can do in our roles as influencers or advisors into government and others for the sorts of strategies they might deploy. So this is really, really useful stuff for us. Please do stay in touch with Pasture for Life, with Groundswell, and with us at the Food Farming Countryside Commission. I'm just going to quickly put our address in the chat before we finish up, for those of you that want to. It just remains for me to say thank you, Pasture for Life, thank you, Groundswell, for hosting this, but especially thank you to our brilliant panellists, Daniel Poole, Charlie Burrell, Maria Spink. That was an absolutely fascinating conversation, as you can tell from the fact that I've managed to make us overrun by a good 6-7 minutes. And so I look forward to seeing you all again before too long. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.